With $10 worth of Biotherm, Bonnie Bell, L'Oreal, Marcel, Max Factor, or Revlon Cosmetics at Shoppers Drug Mart. Pick up this big and breezy nylon tote bag for just...
SCTV, we're coming through for you.
Good morning, and it's congratulations to Mike Harcourt, reaffirmed as Mayor of Vancouver, a man who kept his cool when all others around him, particularly Willie van der Zam, were losing theirs. Mr. Harcourt, is this your final term of glory before you go on to greater and finer jobs?
Well, Jack, as you know, I was asked by a number of people to run federally and provincially, and I said, sorry, I can't stand the demotion. I'm the Mayor of Vancouver, and I'd like to seek another term and see us through the two most exciting years in our city's history, and that's exactly what I'm doing.
I suspect it was your uneasiest campaign because of the tactics of your soundly defeated opponent, Mr. van der Zam. Would that not be a correct assessment?
Oh, it was a tough one, but you recall right off the top when we opened our campaign headquarters, I said this is going to be the most important election in the city's history and the toughest election we've had, and it was that. Bill and I were going 15, 17 hours a day. We didn't turn down a forum to talk about the issues in Vancouver, and I enjoyed it, though. It was a good, tough fight, and we took it to the Nonpartisan Association, and we won a resounding victory.
A funny thing happened just now during this broadcast. You called him Bill. Up until now, you've called him the man from Surrey. Is he now a human being again?
Oh, he was. He's been a human being all the way along. I've had serious differences with him, as you know, and the public looked at the policies and the way that I would continue to run the city, and they listened to the man, Bill van der Zalm, and the way he performed and what he had to say, and they clearly chose to continue with sensible and moderate leadership that I've given the city over the last 4 years. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm getting on with some very important challenges and 2 extremely exciting years.
In other words, the voters gave the back of their hand to his red baiting. Was that his biggest single mistake?
Oh, I think he ran a bad campaign from the beginning, Jack, and that would just confirm people's worst fears, that sort of a tactic. Yeah, we ran a positive campaign, a tough one. I said we were going to be positive. We were positive. We stuck to the issues of giving good administration to the city, of bringing people together, working together, cooperation, and having a clear vision of what people in this city want and where we're going. And so we stuck to that game plan, and I think the wheels came off of their bandwagon very early, and it continued. And I think the comments that he made, the red baiting comments, confirmed people's worst fears and reinforced the reason why people gave me such a substantial mandate.
Now, despite your magnificent personal popularity, you still didn't manage to drag in Carol Walker, Jane Swanson, or Ron Johnson. Pity, hey?
Well, they came awful close, though, and I may say that sometimes you have to run 3 or 4 times in the at-large system.
Do you think there's any possibility of inaccuracies, and that the new system of merely going to vote, showing ID, led perhaps to an inaccuracy which may see Bruce Yorke defeated on a recount?
I don't think so, Jack. That system has been in effect in the rest of the province for a number of years now, and was just finally introduced into Vancouver this election. I mentioned it to our city clerk on Saturday night, late Saturday night, because already the sour grapes were coming out of Bill, and our city clerk said that he hadn't heard of any irregularities, that he'd spoken to some of the returning officers, and it was news to him. I think we should stop the sour grapes. We should stop that kind of negative politics and get back to the very exciting future that we have, and that's what I'm doing. I've already started yesterday with the closing of the old Cambie Bridge, and we're going to go lickety-split now to get a new Cambie Bridge ready and have it in place there amongst Expo and BC Place, and let's get on with our future instead of looking back over the past with sour grapes. I congratulate all the people who ran, the people who succeeded in getting enough votes, And I accept the judgment of the people of Vancouver. I'm a Democrat, first and foremost.
And you won, too.
And I won a very substantial margin, and I hope that clears away all of the whining about our council being negative and not in favor of the mega projects. I hope people realize that we're going to continue to fight for our city and fight for the best deal, and that that's totally acceptable and honorable, and that's what the voters think, too.
Off you go to City Hall, because I'm now going to get into some of the sour grapes after you leave from Phillip Owen, who was nosed out by that man whom Van der Zalm obviously fears greatly, Bruce Yorke. Thanks, Mayor Mike Harcourt, Phillip Owen, and hopefully Bruce Yorke after the break. Good morning, Phillip Owen.
Good morning.
It was a near thing for you, Phillip. You came within a couple of hundred votes of knocking Bruce Yorke off for the 10th spot in the council. And I gather you're very unhappy about it. Could you tell me why?
Well, I think it's extremely close when you think of 239 votes on 54,000. That's a very small percentage. I understand that when it's within 250 votes in any event, the city clerk makes a review of the tally sheet. So City Hall is, themselves are aware of the reason, the justification of some review.
Well, a review of the tally sheets wouldn't necessarily be an examination of the value of the affidavits of those who voted under the new system, would it?
That's correct. That's correct.
Do you believe that there was any form of irregularity which calls for, say, a judicial review and an examination of the affidavits?
Yes, yes, I do. Very much so.
Oh, how? Where's your evidence?
Well, I've had just a tremendous number of phone calls. I was on the phone almost all day yesterday, unsolicited phone calls from a whole variety of citizens all over the city. Some telling me their name and address, and others not wanting to.
And what kind of allegations did they make?
Well, they made allegations, but they were into several polling stations, and they said that they were not on the voters list, and so they were given an affidavit which they signed, handed ballot papers, and walked in and voted without being asked for any identification whatsoever.
Well, so the fault there would be the lack of identification to prove
correct.
their residence for the required period in the city of Vancouver.
That's correct. And someone else who used a master charge, and a master charge, you know, just has your initial and name. It probably has P. Owen. I could have shown up later with a driver's license with Phillip W. Owen and an address where I live at my residence, and used that and gone back with something else and used my office address.
Is this not the same kind of voting which is allowed in provincial and federal elections?
Well, I'm not sure about that, but it doesn't seem logical to me, and it's what the citizens are saying. I mean, a tremendous number of citizens were just horrified at that they weren't asked for identification. A lot of them thought at least with a picture on it, but certainly with a name and an address. You should have...
How many phone calls would you have had? A dozen or 100?
Oh, more than that. 15 to 20.
And did they come from just the east end of the city, perhaps?
No, all over the city.
From all over the
yes,
city?
Yes, sir. West End, East End, South Vancouver, everywhere.
Well, as long as the people were honest about the whole thing, therefore you would have no complaint.
That's correct.
You may have a complaint about sloppy ballot officials who didn't accept the proper ID. What would have been proper ID? That's what I don't know.
Well, I would think that certainly the best idea is a driver's license. But, of course, a lot of people don't have a driver's license, I suppose, so that's not something that should be totally required. But two pieces of identification, something with your name on it, and certainly something else with your name and address. You should be required to prove that you live where you say you live.
Now, what are you seeking? Will you be happy with a review of the tally sheets?
No, not at all.
You won't be happy with it?
No, total judicial recount.
Total judicial recount?
Yes.
And what are you going to do about it?
Well, we're going to make sure that it's correct and fair. We want to know exactly what the citizens of Vancouver felt and how they voted on Saturday. So we'll do a detailed judicial recount.
You want some of these affidavits as to residents, all of them examined?
That's correct.
For
and every tally looked at and every ballot looked at.
That might controvert the whole election if you could prove a prima facie case.
That's right. It could. That might happen.
Have you got enough people to go to the court with an affidavit for a prima facie something or other?
Yes, I do.
So what you're looking there for is for a possible possibly to controvert the entire election.
No, I'm not saying that's what I'm looking for. That could flow from the judicial recount. But the first thing is to do a detailed judicial recount. Well, that's the first step.
As it happens, I've got Bob Henry on the telephone now, and if you don't mind, you'll hear the conversation if I can just ask him a question.
Okay.
Bob Henry is a city clerk, has been for many years at Vancouver City Hall. Bob, you may not have heard what Mr. Owen was saying, but he's looking for a judicial recount of all, not just a review of the tally sheets. Do you think, is that something that you can do?
No, this would be up to a judge, Jack.
So what can you do if Mr. Owen comes up this morning and says, hey, I don't like this election and I've received a number of phone calls? What can you do about it?
Well, first of all, he'll have to wait until I declare, and I haven't declared yet. And under the charter, I am required, if there's less than 250 votes between say, the 10th ban and the 11th, I am required to review the tally sheets for the two candidates, as well as the summary sheets that we use.
In other words, the arithmetic on them.
That's right.
And how long will that take you to do?
I think possibly a day and a half.
Will you do that for the entire election or merely for the two candidates?
I'm only allowed to do it for the two candidates.
And then you will declare one or other elected.
That's correct.
Once you've declared, are you then open to legal challenge?
That's right.
Bob, I'm much obliged. This is the first time we've used this.
No, Art Phillips got in on a judicial recount.
No, but I'm talking about this system of affidavit voting with identification.
We had affidavit voting before, but it was changed, and this method was brought in this year at the wishes of council, and it's the same, of course, with other municipalities. All the other municipalities in BC do.
Now, what is satisfactory identification for this purpose?
We asked our DROs for any kind of identification.
Any kind of identification?
Because there's so much out there, whether it be driver's license or whatever. Some people don't have a driver's license and so on. So we said any kind of identification showing their name so that they could identify. That would be the person who is swearing the oath, because the onus is on the actual person swearing the oath, that they are qualified.
Name and address, surely. I mean, a MasterCard wouldn't really identify you, would it?
Well, but then you get into the question of people have moved and they don't have something with their proper address. So do you deny them the right to vote then? You know, so we didn't want to get into this, and we were advised that as long as you could tie up the signature of the voter against some form of identification.
In other words, the penalty is if somebody is found to have signed a phony affidavit, they can be individually charged and punished under the law.
That's correct.
Hey, Bob Henry, I'm much obliged. Okay, did you hear that, Philip?
Yes, I did.
What do you think of it?
Well, I don't totally agree with it, because you're concerned about one citizen who may not have proper identification, and there's some justification for that, but what's to stop the proliferation of that, where the people wander all over the place and come back and forth many times with 4 or 5 different pieces of identification with their name on it, using different addresses. Now, who's going to put all that together and find out whether that person did or did not vote many times? I'm just responding to citizens' phone calls and citizens' facts as they presented them to me.
Well, you now will not be going to City Hall, therefore, until Bob declares.
I've been advised by legal counsel that the judicial recount has to be filed within 10 days. So I just found out now that it's going to take him a day or two. I suppose if it took him 3 or 4 days, I've got to make sure I don't run beyond that 10-day requirement.
Phillip Owen, thank you very much for coming down this morning.
Thank you.
Much obliged. Now, I want to take you for a moment to a clip from Pamela Martin's newscast the other night in which Bill Van der Zam made a kind of, to me, a very uneasy remark about the man who is ahead in the seat at the moment, Bruce Yorke.
Greatest disappointment in the whole of the campaign, my greatest disappointment, is that on the last ticket, number 10 in the council, it was a choice between a good Christian businessman whose father was the Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia, he's a nice family person, and a communist. And the voters are back.
I did not feel that was a particularly apt remark to that this morning, and I don't know if Bruce... Good morning, Bruce Yorke.
Good morning, Jack.
Did you happen to hear the Van der Zam clip just now?
No, I just sort of missed it because I didn't quite get it on, but I got the main drift.
Well,
par for the course.
Par for the course. Now, do you feel... have you had any reports from your scrutineers and whatnot, because this confusion could have run both ways, about irregularities in voting by affidavit?
No, it's just a matter of sour grapes. Look, there was a tremendous increase in the number of voters, and we decisively rejected the NPA across the city, and to suggest, you know, that there are some irregularities is really a slur on the citizens of Vancouver, and it's time that Mr. Van der Zam packed up his bags and left permanently. On the other hand, if he wants to come in here and work properly and earn his spurs, that's another matter.
Talking on that, though, it is proper that there should be a recount because your majority was only 239 votes, and it seems that if there's fewer than 250, there must be a review of the tally sheets by Bob Henry, the city clerk.
Oh, no question at all about that. We have utter confidence in what the of the administration of the city and the proper handling of the votes, and of course we have nothing to fear from a full count and a complete investigation of the circumstances, because we're absolutely confident that the citizens of Vancouver have spoken. They have decisively rejected the NPA. In general, we have a very progressive council re-established, and I'm a part of it. I'm very pleased to be part of it.
Well, Van der Zam's comment this morning in effect was, and as I'd say, I found it kind of tasteless too, that if you're not a Christian, you're not a businessman, and if you are a communist, really he's appalled. Now, here's your chance to have at Van der Zam, who's probably be giving up his lease in his house and moving back to Surrey.
I don't need to have a back at Van der Zam. The citizens of Vancouver have spoken, and they've spoken 70% against Van der Zam, and that's all that I'm really interested in. I could care less about Mr. Van der Zam.
Good. My thanks to Bruce Yorke. Congratulations, Bruce.
Thank you, Jack. It was a historic victory for democracy in the city of Vancouver.
And I'll be back with, it's actually a real live, living, breathing social credit cabinet minister is in my studio this morning. They're not all in Palm Springs or at the Michael Jackson concert. Tom Waterland, Minister of Forests, after the break. It doesn't do to talk about the state of British Columbia's forest economy at the moment. Many of the big companies are losing money hand over fist. Markets have disappeared in Europe. They ain't all that strong in Japan, and we do our best in the United States. And it would seem that the banks are determined, if necessary, to close down the small operator in British Columbia. Am I too gloomy?
I think so, Jack, as usual.
But you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I certainly do.
I'm talking about the auction and sale of L&K lumber. I'm talking about the unions which have to pick at the bank so that they can try and get their severance pay and their holiday pay and all those things. And it would seem that unless you owe a bank $150 million, they'll close you down.
Actually, Jack, the banks have been instrumental in closing a number of companies who didn't have their credit in line. However, I think it's easy to knock banks. I think we should also look at the fact that the banks have allowed and caused the survival of an awful lot of forest companies in British Columbia as well. Some banks in particular have been extremely good. Others have been less understanding of the difficulties faced by the industry.
Yes, I know, but if you owe them $150 million, you're safe. If you owe them $30 million, they'll call a debenture and put in a receiver, right? Broadly speaking.
Well, it's the thing. $150 million to a company worth $2 billion is not a great chunk, but $30 million to a company that's worth 40, it could be. So it's all relative, isn't it?
One of the aspects of the current industry which upsets the IWA have been the fact that ships are stacked up taking logs in export. Why suddenly has there been this great increase in the export of logs when for years it was so tightly controlled?
Jack, there hasn't been a sudden increase in the export of logs. I think if you look at the history, let's take the last decade, each time there's a fall off in the lumber markets, there's an increase, a counterbalancing increase in the export of logs. As lumber markets come back, log exports go down. The log export is a counter-cyclical type of thing. If you look at the trends, that's what's been happening, but at the same time, it's been trending upwards as well. And this current recession has been so prolonged that the log exports have been going up each year of the recession.
Many of these are prime logs, which normally each log would supply a number of jobs in British Columbia. Now we're just cutting the trees, throwing them in the water, and shipping them overseas.
Let's just talk about that for a moment, Jack, because the simplistic common wisdom is that if you export a log, you export a job. Now, this is what Jack Monroe of the IWA NWA says.
Is that not right?
No, I don't think it is, really. If you look at serious studies that have been made about this subject, going back to the Pierce Royal Commission report well, before I became minister, it was commissioned by Bob Williams when he was Minister of Forests, and Peter Pierce argued against that and said it's really not true. Actually, he claimed that when you export logs, providing you do it in a judicious way, that you may be creating jobs. The recent study I had done by Mr. Tribet and a group of consultants who were chosen in consultation with Jack Monroe also said that log exports have very little effect, if any, on the loss of jobs, and quite frankly, he also said that they probably create jobs in British Columbia.
We exported in 1983 250 million cubic meters of logs, and that's about, is that 8% of the BC coastal log cut?
That's right. About approaching 2.5 to 3% of the total provincial cut, Jack.
Yeah, but let's look at the coast.
Okay.
I mean, because none of the interior cut is exported as logs because it's not near water.
Very little of it is, and we do have some exports from.
Is it a fact that the log exports are one of the few things which are maintaining some royalties and stumpage for you people?
We this year have received about $16 million in fees in lieu of manufacturing in the province, plus the stumpage fees that would be chargeable for those logs being harvested.
So you get stumpage fees, and then you get an additional fee in lieu of manufacturing.
That's right.
So you get two taxes on that log.
That's correct.
And is it a fact that log exports are keeping some companies alive which might otherwise be down the tube?
That's Jack. Right now, that cash flow which is being provided by log exports is the difference between survival and non-survival for a number of coastal employers. And there are several thousand loggers directly employed in the forest as a result of the export of log trade. And of course, there's also the downstream, the transportation, longshoremen, all these types of jobs that flow from it as well. Look, Jack, don't misinterpret what I'm saying. There is a need, I think, to encourage the further manufacturing in British Columbia, and that is the whole thrust of the new log export policy, which I announced last Thursday. That we must do everything we can to make sure that as much added value as takes place in British Columbia as possible. But we also have to recognize the fact that logs are a commodity that trade in the marketplace, and if we trade in those logs, then we should have a very, very specific reason for it. And the reason under the new policy is that if you can use logs to help to pay for the logging of timber to deliver it to the markets in British Columbia so it can be manufactured in British Columbia, you are creating both jobs in logging plus the jobs in the manufacturing business.
Now I get the picture. If you do a stand of trees somewhere, you do a stand of trees and you clear cut it, the best logs go overseas and the lower grade logs will supply jobs in the lumber mills.
No, that's no criteria at all, Jack.
That's what Hero says. He's the expert.
I know what Hero says. He is a expert. What is an expert anyway? Jack, some areas, for example, we have been this last couple of years exporting some logs to China. Chinese don't require, in fact, they don't want the highest quality logs. There are many species and grades of logs that in future will not be exported and in the past have not been exported.
And the Chinese don't want lumber. They want to make their own lumber and use every single scrap of that log, don't they?
British Columbia is one of the few jurisdictions in the world that sells any lumber to China. And we have entered this trade in the last few years, and they seem to tie the purchase of lumber to the purchase of logs. And although we don't have a conscious policy of allowing an export for that reason, exports are applied for that reason. As long as they meet the other criteria needed, they are made available.
Tom Waterland, Minister of Forests in British Columbia, and you'll spell out for us after the break the new rules on log exporting and what they mean.
Right.
Take it away. What are the new rules that take effect December 31st, 1985? I didn't quite understand what you were saying the other day.
Okay, Jack.
You're allowing more export until December 31st, 1985.
No, we're not allowing more export. The rules will change, Jack, and they won't change immediately as of December 31st, 1985. The new rules, the new criteria for a log export will be phased in and will be completely in place by that time, and the old requirements and criteria for log export will be finished. And let me tell you exactly what the new log export criteria are and what they intend to accomplish. First of all, there will be only 3 reasons under which logs can be exported. One will be if a stand of timber can be demonstrated prior to the issuance of a cutting permit that it is uneconomic to harvest and sell in the local market with the prices the local manufacturers can afford to pay for those logs.
If you get better prices in Japan or somewhere.
Well, if they can't afford them locally, what we'll do is they say, okay, in an actuarial sense, you tell us what it's going to cost to log that stand, to transport them, to get them to market, and we know what it costs to manufacture in British Columbia. If, when you have those numbers, you put it into your little calculator, and it comes out that you have to export X% of that stand at such and such a price, which we also know, in order to make the whole stand economically usable in British Columbia, they will be allowed to export that percentage of the stand.
Okay, that's one.
And just one other very important point there, Jack, that if you don't do that, none of that stand will ever come to the manufacturing plants in British Columbia and will be of no value to anyone. So you really are creating jobs in the manufacturing and in the logging business.
What are you talking about, some over-mature stand?
I'm talking about any hemlock balsam stand on the coast that is in such a condition, has such value, and has such logging costs that it's uneconomic to use. It may not be over-mature. It may be a new second growth stand. Now, the second criteria is what I will be calling the rehabilitation forest. We have some coastal forests in the mid-coast, the north coast, places like that where the timber is decadent, has very low value. You may have 30, 40, 45% solid wood value in it. The rest is rotten. And it cannot be harvested in British Columbia because of the cost of handling all this rotten stuff in addition to the good stuff you get out. We will put up proposals whereby we will allow a company to come in, a logging company or somebody joint venturing with China or Japan or whatever, and say, you tell us how far you can come along in preparing that timber site for growing a new crop of trees if you can take advantage of that high-priced export market. By doing that, Jack, we'll have that export market in effect helping to pay to rehabilitate a forest, which will get more wood growing, which will help us overcome the wood deficit that we're looking at down the road.
No, but they'll salvage the best they can of a decadent forest and prepare it for planting. But who'll plant it?
Well, that'll depend upon what the numbers say. If their bid says we can even afford to go so far as to plant it, then they'll plant it. It'll be a competitive tendering process. If they can't, Jack, then we'll plant it. We'll be putting a new forest into production.
Third point.
The third point is that quite often during normal forest harvesting or silvicultural operations or land clearing, species of trees will be developed that have no use in British Columbia. Alder, for example, on the coast. As we rehabilitate a brushed-in coastal stand, we may produce a number of alder logs. If there is no manufacturing plant in British Columbia to use them, the only option we have is either to export them or to burn them. And I don't think burning them makes much sense if you can get a buck for them on the export market.
Well, that's good. I mean, the place is covered with alder.
Sure. It should be growing coniferous species that have high value.
Yeah, and they should be cut and exported if anybody can use them for hardwood furniture or something.
That's right. And we should at the same time be encouraging the manufacturing of those furniture plants in British Columbia.
In other words, this will be departmental decisions from now on. Up to now, log exports relied, I believe, on a guy with logs getting 3 letters of refusal and going to a committee. 3 letters that nobody wanted these logs and going to a committee. That was the present system, right?
Well, I don't know how many letters you had to have, Jack, but it had to be adequately demonstrated that there was no one in British Columbia that needed those logs and could afford to pay the price that it cost to put them on the marketplace.
So now it's different. You've created this new policy. You say it's a good one to give the log exporters a cash flow to help modernize the industry?
To help deliver logs to manufacturing plants in British Columbia at a price they can afford to pay to maintain that employment base in the manufacturing plant.
You can't blame me. This really is a step when you look at the fact that the major forest companies lost, 65 million in the first 9 months. This is a step to help them survive through this crunch.
Well, not only through the crunch, Jack. No, the time frame by which this new policy will be fully operational will help provide that cash flow in the meantime. But in the long run, it'll maintain an awful lot more wood, and it'll help us overcome that deficit, because an awful lot of the wood that we're talking about is not included in our allowable cut right now because it's economically inaccessible. It can't be harvested and delivered at a price that can be afforded.
But the prices are so good overseas that it can be brought out and sent to them.
Some of it, if they buy some of it and help to pay the cost, the rest of it to the mills, we'll all be better off.
Okay. I understand that you're so hard up for revenue, you can't even pay the big companies the monies you owe them for demanding higher standards of logging roads, and that you're way behind in your payments to the big boys. You know how it is. They go in with a logging road. You people say we want 66 feet provincial standard, and you have to pay the difference, right?
No, no, Jack.
Is that not the system?
No, the logging road standards are determined by the government, and you have a lot of different standards. For example, a main access road to an area which will be used by a number of logging companies, plus the general public, will have to be built to a much better standard than a road into one little logging site.
Don't you pay the lumber companies properly for upgrading roads beyond their requirements?
No, all logging roads are eventually paid for by the value in that tree standing out in the forest, Jack. And we have a system of...
I was misinformed.
You're not very often misinformed, Jack. Once in a while.
One of the big noises told me it, but you tell me I'm wrong.
Well, Jack,
we
have a system of crediting the cost of building those roads. The companies will front end the cost. They'll put up the money, build the road, and then we'll credit that against future stumpage under Section 88 of the Forest Act.
Okay. Now, I was fascinated in the allegations by the Ombudsman, supported by other people, that the government of British Columbia had lost much stumpage revenue due to inaccurate scaling at Shoal Island. That thing seems to have been buried down a deep hole. What happened to it?
Well, Jack, it's
the inquiry. It's just been buried.
Well, because from the point of view of those in the media business, it's not on the front page every day, doesn't mean it's been buried at all. It hasn't been newsworthy lately.
That's because you made it not newsworthy.
No, I didn't. I don't control the news media, Jack.
There was going to be a public hearing.
You're not accusing me of controlling the news media.
No, I'm accusing you of hiding it down a hole.
Actually, what's happened, Jack, is as was requested by the Ombudsman, we've had our regional manager in Vancouver, Don Grant, conducting an investigation of the details and facts of that case. And I can't comment on his investigation. I haven't even spoken to him since he was asked to do that job.
Will you get the result eventually?
Absolutely, yes.
Will that be public?
Absolutely. It'll be reported back to the legislature and to the Ombudsman. And Jack, if there was any errors in scaling the logs at Shoal Island, if the system was not absolutely correct in some ways, I'm the first one that wants to know.
Because you want the money.
Well, we want the money, and we want everybody to be treated fairly in the industry. If there was a mistake, we want to know, but I'm not going to assume because the Ombudsman and one or two loggers made an accusation that's correct. I want to find out the facts, and that's what Don Grant is trying to do right now.
One small question from me. This new forestry minister in Ottawa, he's no use to you, is he? What's his name?
Actually, Jerry Merrithew, I met Jerry last week, or week before last, I guess it was now, in Ottawa. I've spoken to him on the phone a number of times. I think he will help to raise the profile of forestry in Canada with the federal government.
Will he give you any money for our sadly neglected reforestation? That's what we want to know.
I hope so. That was the reason for my trip to Ottawa. We have been negotiating for the last couple of years for a new forest management, intensive management agreement. And he is very enthusiastic about it, Jack, and I hope we can do something. But he hasn't got the money yet.
Good. Time for one segment of calls to Tom Waterland, the Minister of Forests. What else is he the Minister of?
What do you mean, what else? What else is there,
Jack?
Jack?
Just forests? You're not lands, that's permanent.
No, that's totally
You're just forests.
What do you mean just?
Is that all you've got, forests?
I am responsible for forests, yes.
The man from Merritt?
Yes.
No, where are you from, Merritt?
I'm from all over Yale Littlewood constituency, Jack.
Questions to Tom Waterland after the break. Have we still got a premier in this province?
Absolutely, the best premier we've ever had, Jack.
Is he around these days?
Of course he's around.
Nice to know. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Waterland.
Good morning.
I have 3 questions for you, and I'll ask them, then I'll hang up and listen to your answers.
Okay.
I'd like to know why you allow logging companies to introduce new machinery for log processing at the cost of thousands of jobs in BC. Wouldn't it be much better to insist that they provide X amount of jobs per log? Second question is, I haven't heard you say anything this morning with regard to the habitat for animals and birds and fish, etc.
Okay.
My third question is, why log Mirzon under South Moresby when there are thousands and thousands of people in BC against logging of small islands?
Okay, let's go to Mears Island and South Moresby first of all. That logging will take place because we need the jobs.
Oh, Jack, everybody says, this particular island, that particular valley, some particular stand of timber should not be harvested, and that particular stand won't make any difference to the overall provincial scene. But every acre of good productive timberland in British Columbia contributes to the total allowable cut that we have to work on. And as you keep whittling away on it, as you would if you accepted all these rather irrational proposals, then you wouldn't have any forests left, and it's still the very biggest part of our economy, Jack. I think the forest industry in years gone by, as it developed over the decades, has made a lot of mistakes. There have been a lot of things done that shouldn't have been done that aren't allowed to be done now. And Jack, we do it in a much more sensitive way now, and I'm sure that as Moresby Island, as the timber is harvested there, we can do it in a way that will not materially detract.
It'll improve it.
It won't improve it, Jack, but it won't materially detract from the aesthetic values that Mears Island provides for the community of Tofino.
Forget the habitat, we don't have time for that. But what's he talking about, allowing logging companies to introduce new machinery that costs thousands of jobs?
Well, Jack, I guess my best way of answering that is to perhaps go back 75 years or 100 years or so in the forest industry. And if we said at that time, don't allow any advancements of technology, we'd still be making lumber with pit saws, and we'd still be hacking trees down with axes and wedges.
It is a fact, though, that technological improvement has wiped many thousands of jobs out in BC in the dimension lumber business. Is that not so?
Technological improvement has reduced the labor required in the production of logs.
And you can't stop it.
And I can't stop it, nor would I, because if we do, what we're doing is causing the demise of our entire industry.
Where you can help, though, I was talking to a big pulp operator in British Columbia the other day, and he tells me that the municipal and provincial taxes on a ton of pulp in Quebec are $3, and in British Columbia, $44 a ton. Are you going to recommend that these taxes in some way be cut?
I think we have an example in British Columbia where I think it's he was referring to a ton of newsprint, Jack. But that's what it is. That's one of the things that Hugh Curtis has been hearing in spades during his tours around the province, and I hope something can be done about that, because it really is a cost disadvantage to our industry.
Difficult for you, though, because your revenues are down so much that you need to hammer the taxation of business.
If our industry fails, the revenues will be down an awful lot more.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. In reference to your last call, it's obvious that there has been mistakes made in the forestry over the last number of years, but I haven't seen any signals from your department or your government that any change in direction is imminent. I mean, Mears Island is quite a good example where a change in thinking could it's a high-profile situation, and if the government was sincere in a change of direction, in looking at forestry a little more seriously, this would be a good example to do that.
What's your question?
The question is, what are some concrete plans that you have in reforestation? Corner Brook, Newfoundland, the whole town is going to go down because there was no provision made in the long term for reforestation in that segment.
Okay, good question.
Well, you know, I think there's a number of myths abroad in the country that people seem to gobble up and accept as fact, Jack. One is that we're not doing anything about reforestation in British Columbia. In the last 9 years, we have increased our reforestation, the number of seedlings planted in this province, from about 65 to 70 million up to 120 million this year. We have been increasing at a very rapid rate, and we will continue to do so. Some of the things we haven't been able to do as much as we'd like to is the more optional intensive management work, and we can do that as money is available. But this business of saying that we haven't done anything in terms of changing the attitudes of the industry and the government over the last number of years is nonsense, really. My function as a Minister of Forests is not to say we will not harvest these areas. My function is to say how can we do it in a sensitive way, have the aesthetic values, the recreational values, the wildlife habitat, and still have the commercial value of the timber that makes jobs in British Columbia, creates our economy, and provides opportunities for the people.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. Mr. Waterland, I'd like to ask you a question and hang up and listen to your reply, if I might.
Yeah.
Regarding a letter earlier this year to the forest companies stating that as of April 1st, 1985, no overtime will be worked to scale timber by government scalers. Are you planning to phase out government scalers and replace them with the company's own scalers?
Good question.
No, I'm not planning on doing that. There has been more scaling done by contract scalers, people who have received qualifications to scale, and mainly it's in order to save the cost of moving a scaler, say perhaps into a remote area to scale a bunch of timber that has been harvested when there may be somebody very close by who is qualified and capable of doing it.
In other words, you're using more contract scalers and cutting down the use of government scalers.
I guess basically, Jack,
that's what you're saying.
Yes, we are doing less scaling by government, but still the main function, or the main scaling function, is performed by government employees.
And you've no plans to change that in the name of restraint?
No, not. We're not going to consciously change that. We're going to try to bring efficiencies and cost savings into all functions of our ministry, one of which is a scaling function.
As I recall the IWA, they don't object to IWA scalers. They don't see the need for government scalers who often put up silly little picket lines and close camps.
I think the IWA would very much like to see scaling done by official scalers who, from their point of view, are members of the IWA.
I would give you an excuse to have some restraint and wipe out government scalers, wouldn't it?
I have no intention of wiping out government scalers, Jack.
Good. Penticton, go ahead.
Yes, I'm the son of a mill owner who Mr. Waterland there knew. I would have liked to carry on in his footsteps and get myself a job in the industry. I've sent out 80+ rejection letters, have a degree in business from SFU and a lumber sales course. I'd like to know if he can tell me what my future is going to be.
Would your father close down by the banks?
By the banks, yes, but with little assistance from anybody else, apparently.
I have no crystal ball. I can't tell you what your future is. I can't tell you what my future is, for goodness sakes. I'm sorry, I can't help you.
But he's asking you, should a young man go into the forestry business in British Columbia today with hopes of advancement, or are we a real downward trend and it'd be better to go somewhere else?
If someone can compete in the marketplace that exists out there, there are ways of getting a supply of timber to use in your manufacturing plants. But, sir, I don't know the particular circumstances of where you are, what your capabilities in that marketplace are, or what markets you tend to work in. But you know, there are opportunities, a lot of opportunities in British Columbia, a lot more than there's ever been.
Eh?
Yes, Jack, there always is. Tomorrow there'll be more than there is today.
Eh?
Yes.
With all the unemployment?
Yes.
15.1%?
Jack, we have a
20% in Kamloops?
retooling taking place throughout this entire industry and throughout the entire economy of British Columbia. And we will be the most competitive people in the world, providing we stay on the course we're on right now.
I want to believe you, but I can only think of the new mill at Couch, and that's the only thing I can think of.
Well, there's lots of things taking place in British Columbia, Jack.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, hello. The question is not being answered as to the export of logs. Mr. Waterland, does the export of logs cause loss of jobs or not? And I would rather you give me a straight explanatory answer rather than giving me citing studies. When Mr. Webster cited studies, you said, "What's an expert?" You used an expert studies yourself. I'd like to know the ins and outs of this situation. I'd like to know some information rather than double talk. Secondly, you stated a little later in the show that you would be taking a report on an incident or a situation Mr. Webster spoke about to the legislature. If we don't have a legislature that is meeting, I'd like to know why the legislature hasn't met for 6 months. Okay, so if I could have answers to those two questions in detail.
I'll do my best, sir, but you won't succeed.
Well,
would you agree with me, Mr. Waterland, that the export of a good log employs fewer people than that good log being cut into dimension lumber?
Jack, if that were the only log we had available to be cut into dimension lumber, it would. But the facts are, and every serious study, as I said, that has been done on this subject has demonstrated that that is not the case. We can manage our exports, which is what's going to happen under new policy, to be sure that it does have the function and that it actually does create additional job opportunities and problems. That's what we intend to do. Log exports in themselves don't eliminate jobs.
To be fair to the minister, I must interpret his remarks by saying the log exports are supplying a substantial cash flow which will enable some companies to survive the present slump and might enable some logs to be put onto the local market which otherwise wouldn't be logged at all. Is that right?
Basically, that's it, Jack. And as far as the question about the legislature sitting, he's asking the wrong guy.
Yeah, but you would agree with me publicly that such is the crisis in BC's economy this winter, that it would be good to have a good, vibrant meeting of the legislature to try and give the people the impression that they have leaders.
Is that what the legislature accomplishes, Jack?
Could do.
I think, Jack, there's an awful lot of work being done and has been done, a lot of things being accomplished in terms of our economy in this last year, and we can carry on with that. The legislature will sit. I can't tell you when because I don't know when.
Thank you. Now, I have some unexpected guests. I haven't been quite briefed on them, but I gather they're from union construction companies who are making an application to the Labour Board, perhaps this week, to have the facility of setting up parallel, side-by-side, non-union companies so that they can compete with the Kirchhoffs of the world. Very big issue, as we know, in British Columbia. After the break.
I'll double breast.
Here's what they're basically
this can be a very significant move which could throw a very large rock into the peaceful pond of the construction industry in British Columbia. Now let me set the stage. These are 3 unionized contractors, construction contractors, right? Construction contractors.
Yes, general contractors.
General contractors. Their lawyer, on behalf of a group of 40 in all, is going to go to Labour Board to ask that British Columbia allows double-breasting of companies, as in Alberta. That means that I have Webster Construction unionized, which bids on union jobs, and I've got Jack Construction non-union, which can bid on non-union or any kind of jobs. That's been fought very strongly by the labour movement in British Columbia. Now, the first man I'm going to talk to is Dan Howe of Lorac Construction. Lorac, did I summarize the problem properly?
Yes, as far as we just cannot compete anymore. We are asking the Labour Board for a special hearing and asking them to change their interpretations of Section 37, which deals with double-breasting, the common employer. But we are also asking them to change their interpretation under Section 53, which is the successorship clauses in the Labour Code that says, me as the principal of Lorac Construction, I'm union forever.
You can never get out from under the union.
Exactly. My company can go bankrupt tomorrow. If I start up again in 2 weeks, I'm unionized.
Not even with a decertification vote?
How do you get a decertification vote?
Well, let's go to...
You need employees.
That's right. So
I have
therefore,
no
if you
employees.
go bankrupt and you lay off and you're union forever because you can't have a decertification vote and you can't set up another company.
Even today, I cannot decertify through a vote because I have no employees. And I cannot compete. I cannot get a job. So how can I hire anybody? That's the problem we're in right now.
Could your wife not set up a company?
No.
That's
because it would be deemed that I would basically be giving direction to that company.
All
and
right.
There's a common employer status.
Let's go to Dennis Ratcliffe. Tell me your position, Dennis. The name of your company.
My company is Ratcliffe and Sons Construction Company Limited.
Right.
Jack, in 1983, I approximately bid on $50 million worth of work. I didn't receive any of this work owing to the being taken by non-union companies. Now, at that time, my men, seeing that this was happening, applied to the Labour Relations Board, and the code is quite explicit. It says that if a majority of the men vote for decertification, it should be granted, according to the board. They made this application. We had a hearing on February the 20th, 1984, and as of this day, we have had no decision, no word from them as to whether we are going to be decertified or not. There's such a lot of uncertainty in the board's
policies.
Well,
yes. Let me spell that out. This is Dennis Ratcliffe. A few years ago, you were bidding on $50 million worth of work.
Yes.
And getting a fair chunk of it.
Getting 2 to 3 million, yes.
And in the last 2 years, you've gone from 3 million to 0 in terms of receipts from your contracts. So your employees, knowing this, asked in September '83 for a decertification vote so you could go non-union.
So we could compete.
September '83, and here we are in November '84, and you haven't even yet had a ruling from this Labour Board.
That's correct, yes.
Why so long? There are dozens of them down there. But you've had no... Now, why do you want to go this? Would you rather stay a union company if times are good?
We would rather stay. We've been union all our life, yes. We would sooner stay a union, but the union just won't budge. They won't let us compete. They won't come down. They're totally inflexible, yes.
Now let's go to the third man, who is Arlen McConnell. What's the score with you? Arlen Construction Company, Arlen.
I have not had any union employee for a year and 2 weeks. I cannot compete against non-union.
Are you members of what we call CLRA?
I am, yes.
Construction Labour Relations Association, and you come under the full Building Trades Council union agreements?
Yes.
I'm not.
You're not?
I'm an independent.
You're CLRA? CLRA and you're CLRA. How long have you been in business?
17 years.
Have your men always been union up to now?
Yes.
When did you last have any employees?
28th of October. They worked for 1 day on January the 9th. They phoned and asked for work so they could vote to decertify me. And the union talked them out of it after they had their vote.
your men were trying to decertify their union so they could keep their jobs. You wouldn't have that many men employed, would you? How many? 10?
I had 3 at the time.
3 men?
Yeah.
3 men. $1 million in contract would be a big year for you, but good.
Yeah. Well, I've had more men, but
yeah,
3 at the time of the vote.
And so they were trying to decertify too, and you gave them a day's work so they could vote on the decertification.
That's right. That's what they asked for.
And then what happened?
The union talked them out of the procedure.
No. Okay, let me get this picture quite clear. You are going to Labour Board to say, let us double breast. If the Labour Board said you can double breast, what would you do tomorrow?
I would probably set up a second company.
And how much less would your bids be than on your present union basis of union wages and fringe benefits?
I would probably guess 20% less.
How about you? What would you say?
I would say about 20%. The non-union have approximately a 30% factor lower than ours. So I'd say about 20-25%.
So from the 40 people with whom you're associated, there's an obvious total sense of desperation that you're going to go under.
Yes.
You're going to be crushed under the whole weight of the wages and working conditions in BC.
Yeah.
The answer is not that we want to go non-union. We want to become competitive. If we can get the right to go non-union, either through double-breasting or closing our company and starting up a new company, we can at least get the union so they have to deal with us. Right now, they don't have to talk to us. We're locked into these agreements. They're forever agreements. They don't have to negotiate with any one of us. And they can shut the whole industry down. There's so little union work right now except the big contracts with the major contractors. We're all just basically drowning.
Do you agree with his basic
yes. At the present time, our union agreement, it never closes. It's on to infinity. We don't stand any bargaining power at all. There's no termination.
There's no end to the contract
at all.
There's no end
to the contract at all.
That contract stays in force until a new contract is...
That's correct, right. And then the next one takes
over.
But
you had a say, presumably, in the negotiation of what you now regard as these uneconomic contracts?
I've had a vote, yes, with the CLRA.
I didn't have a vote. I'm an independent contractor. I'm not a member of CLRA.
So you're saying 40 of you, and unless they release us from the Labour Code and let us form non-union companies, we are finished in the construction business in BC for the foreseeable future.
Yes.
This
Of the 40, there's approximately 30 that are independent contractors.
And 10?
Approximately 10 CLRA.
Members of CLRA.
Yep. And our plan is to solicit every unionized contractor and subcontractor in the province, employers groups. We feel there's a lot of people in the province that have a vested interest in what we're doing, and we're going to be looking for their support.
What you say in the letter here, that the board has unionized contractors into a rigid straitjacket, which is leading to their destruction.
Exactly.
Do you have any hope?
Yes.
I think so.
We got to do something, Jack. I mean, to just sit down and do nothing and cry about it, at least if we try.
But if there isn't any work around, you're not going to get any contracts.
There is work around. There is work around. Of course
Who's getting the work?
Non-union.
The non-union contractors are picking up the work.
From $4 million down, they're doing 95%
Well,
of
would
it.
you be paying slave wages on a non-union bidding?
Hopefully not.
Same wages.
And $15 cash is better than 22 plus fringe benefits in paper and UIC in reality.
We would like to see the federal wage guidelines, which the government put into Expo. What's wrong with that for the whole province? There's nothing wrong with that. That's what we'd like to see.
That's what they should have done last April. Right?
Well, yes.
Okay, gentlemen, you're the spearhead of a revolution. But you may not get a hearing from this Labour Board until after Expo is over. You've been waiting long enough to get a decertification, haven't you?
We're aware of that.
Well, yeah, I got to say best of luck to Arlen McConnell of Arlen Construction, Dennis Ratcliffe of Ratcliffe and Sons, Dan Howe of Lorac Construction. Thanks for whipping in this morning. That's a significant move in the Labour movement in British Columbia, if you can get a hearing from the Labour Relations Board. And I'll be back with an old relic from the East. Nice chap, though. After the break. I am not speaking to my next guest. I am in a total snit. I haven't even read his book, because all he's fit to do is play a harmonica.
You're a sorehead. That means how much time do I have to fill? I can do a monologue.
No. Well, is that
I can't do it with the accent.
Blow a note.
Oh, God, made in Japan. The Japanese, they're good at a lot of things, but what would you like? A little Scottish music?
Little Scottish music.
God, this is
The
awful.
Isles. That's enough, Charlie.
Half the notes don't even blow. You only spent 50 cents on that thing.
It cost $1.95, swing band made in Japan. I thought it was good enough for a guy who called me Haggis McBagpipe, the oatmeal savage, guilty of verbal violence and blackmail, funniest thing since the Rhinoceros Party or a menace to society. As a matter of fact, you insulted me more than I have ever been insulted before.
Which is saying a lot. I just said that no guy can come on and say if a man won't come on my program, he isn't fit to be Prime Minister of Canada.
I was speaking for you gutless people in the East who were walking around bowing at his coattails and not asking him any questions.
We were asking him lots of questions, but we weren't getting any answers. We were having trouble getting at him. We're having trouble now. You were right in the sense that we mustn't let him close up on us.
A month after I made my petulant outburst, the Globe and Mail
Three petulant outbursts.
Four. The Globe and Mail was writing editorials saying, who is this man Mulroney? Where is this man Mulroney? And even your members of the Eastern Media Mafia were then complaining.
We're all screaming now, yeah.
I was the first to scream.
You were the first to scream.
I was right.
You were right.
Because he's going to turn out to be a real twit, this man Mulroney.
Well, not a twit. Just because he won't talk to the likes of us doesn't make him a twit. It makes him it's a calculated risk on his part.
Have you seen how he has now changed his tone of voice? Have you noticed that?
No, it's still bedroom.
No.
Still bedroom.
It's much softer and slower and more dignified and more careful. I think he's going to fall off the podium one day. By the way, Charlie, though, you don't have to send me questions with your book to ask you. But I'm going to use some of the questions from this publicity handout. And here's a beautiful one. This is what I'm supposed to ask him. He wrote these questions.
I didn't write it. No. This is the agents do this stuff. I don't write questions.
They're in your name.
What?
These questions.
Well, they tear them up, throw them on the floor like you did the book.
Oh, I'll give you one. Why did Turner win Quadra after such a humiliating defeat nationwide?
You want me to answer that?
Yeah, that's your question. You should know the answer.
You know the answer.
You asked the question.
I didn't ask the question. It's the publisher's agents wrote that question. But since you asked, I'll tell you. It was a sympathy vote on the last weekend because the people of Quadra realized that they were going to get a conservative government anyway. They might as well have that and the leader of the opposition too. Plus the fact that Mrs. Turner went out and worked her butt off. And it worked, but it did turn around in the last, and if it hadn't, I think he'd have kept right on going. I don't think he'd have tried to get back into Parliament at all.
Here's one I'm not going to ask you, according to your own list. The NDP, obviously a rejuvenated party. The idiot didn't know what he was writing. They're not any more rejuvenated than they were before. What will be their role in the next 4 years? Don't answer that question.
All right.
It's a predictable book.
Oh, it's a history. A history is predictable. It's instant history. I just wanted to put between covers the most eventful 6 months that I've ever seen in our politics. It's not a revelatory book. There's nothing.
It's not a what book?
Revelatory.
What's revelatory mean?
Well, that's where
I've never heard of the word
well, I'll tell you. Look,
is there such a word? Look it up in the dictionary. I don't think there is.
There's other books out. Jack Cahill, our old friend, the poor guy, has out with a biography, The Total Life of John Turner. Now, the big revelation in that is that Turner once saved John Diefenbaker's life when they were swimming in Barbados. Right. I don't believe it, but that's in the book. Ian MacDonald's, the big thing in his book about Mulroney is that Trudeau once offered Mulroney a cabinet post. I don't think I believe that either, but that's what I mean by revelation, something that you haven't heard before.
It's something what you mean by revelatory book. Revelatory. No, I agree with you. MacDonald's book is no good at all. I'm not interested in what little coups were pulled off, COUPS, were pulled off in the back room to get voting support here and there. And I would say that MacDonald's book is a boot-licking book, wouldn't you?
well, let's say it's an insider's. It's an authorized book, so it's poisoned to that extent. But it tells you a lot more than you need to know about Mulrooney, but it tells you a lot of stuff.
Professor, we don't expect to see him on the West Coast before the next election.
Jack, he'll be on this show in a trice when he's out here, and you'll have even more fun than you're having right now.
Okay.
So will he.
What did you think of... Actually, I watched Trudeau on Canada AM the other morning, and he didn't say he was going to come back. He was in one of his winsome moods, wasn't he?
Well, he's always had your number. You're soft on him. You always said that when Trudeau was on, something seized up in you. And so you're charmed by him.
Is this typical of your accuracy as a reporter? I would come in here biting my bloody nails.
Yeah, but
and go for him. But he generally beat me too.
Well, all right. What he said was...
okay, shh, quiet please.
You're going to plug the book.
Race for the Rose. You see, this is... I'm really a member of the media mafia myself. Where's your autographing thing?
The autograph? You want me to autograph
No,
it?
no, I don't want to. Where are your autographing appearances?
Oh,
here they are.
you buried it, yeah.
Charles Lynch, the husband of a prominent Conservative member of Parliament who will be in the cabinet one of these days, Claudie Mailly.
You're getting there, by golly. The other
Charles
language.
will be autographing his new book, Race for the Rose, at W.H. Smith Books at Park Royal Shopping Centre, 12:30 to 1:30 today. How much is the book?
$18.95.
You get one book for $18.95, and you get two for $19.
And for 20, you get Lynch thrown in.
Questions to Charlie Lynch, and we'll talk about his bloody book after the break. More seriously now to my good friend Charlie Lynch on the Race for the Rose. I suppose, would you agree with me that it wasn't so much Mulroney's crafty campaign, but the widespread hatred of Trudeau that ensured his magnificent victory?
Both. Hatred of Trudeau, I think, is a little too strong for nationwide. I think it applied out west, but just weariness with him. He'd been around for too long. He'd used up the whole Liberal goodwill across the country. Even in Quebec. I mean, good God, the one thing I think that you nor I nor anybody could have predicted was that Quebec would cave in as soon as Trudeau left, cave in on the Liberals. And the Quebecers just moved their loyalties over to Mulroney, who to them is a Trudeau clone in terms of many, many issues, including the language issue.
Do you think that Wilson, and Wilson especially, and Mulroney, really realize the state of the country at the moment in terms of unemployment and hardship, especially out here in British Columbia? Because we think they've got blinkers on their eyes. Nothing about jobs. Only it looks to us like cutting and slashing, cutting and slashing. And having seen what Bennett did to the retail confidence in this country, if we have 1,000 federal civil servants laid off here, it'll knock the pins from under the retail business.
Well, that's what you're going to get. The Bennett example is the alarm bell. It's there to be seen. Bennett was the first small C conservative leader to act in a small C conservative way, and he did it very clumsily and he did it very brutally. That's the warning. Now, whether they'll heed that warning and not do it, they are going to lay off 1,000 federal public servants, obviously. They are going to cut the pension schemes. They are going to cut the baby bonus scheme. They're going to try to do something, just as you would. I mean, good God, Turner would be doing it too. $36 billion deficit. What are you going to do?
Except they're talking now about a crackdown on UI. You know, UI is something in which people can survive with a little bit of dignity. If they start knocking people off UI or extending the qualification period holus bolus, it'll be murder if everybody goes on welfare.
Well, they're going to do that. What haunts a small C conservative is that the UI encourages a lot of people not to work. And how you apply tests without building up a much bigger bureaucracy, I don't know. But this is the tendency. Now, I say this is Mulroney's tendency and it's Wilson's tendency because these are two private enterprisers, the first we've had in power for a long time. But Mulroney also got this left-wing caucus. Most of these people, you talked about Claudie and people like that, they're all progressive, young, upward mobile Quebecers who were in the PQ, who were in the Liberal Party in Quebec and so on, and they're not the old old-fashioned conservative. So he's got to deal with this wing within his own caucus. Not just that he's got too many MPs, but he's got MPs of a very hot-shot kind.
Ex-separatists, ex-liberals, what you might call in the classic way, the old red Tories.
They had to come from somewhere. There weren't any Tories in Quebec. So what he got...
One last word in the muzzling. Joe Clark's kind of gauche memo that was leaked. Everybody has been muzzled solidly.
On paper, which is even worse. I mean, write a memo. Here's Joe Clark, whose wife, Maureen McTeer, is now a gossip columnist on the CBC. He's saying that I can't fraternize with my own wife, McTeer. Jody White is his chief of staff. She's married to Terry Hargrave, the chief of bureau for Maclean's in Ottawa. And yet he says that nobody in the department can fraternize even socially with people in the media. It's a lot of baloney. I don't know how Joe could be so stupid.
Oh, well, they can get a legal ruling. I wouldn't give it in the army form. We ran into it once in the operation of a bordello in Asmara, Eritrea. But marital relationships do not constitute...
Fraternizing.
Fraternizing.
All right. Thank God it might have cut between me and Claudie, too.
Calls for Charlie. We're going to call Charlie.
All right.
Go ahead to Charles Lynch.
Mr. Lynch, I have one question for which I'd like a straight answer. Are we getting another Nancy and Ronnie in Ottawa?
Yes, but with more intelligence, I think. The Mulrooney's managerial experience is deeper than Reagan's was. Mulrooney is younger than Reagan is, and Mila, the Venus de Mila, as we call her, is a heck of a lot smarter than Nancy.
Better looking, too.
And better looking, too. And she's smarter than Mulrooney. This is one of those partnerships where the woman is smarter than the man.
Well, isn't Jill Turner smarter than John Turner?
On the record, yes.
Well, with regards to dealing with the press, or is it going to be closed like they have it in Washington?
Well, I pray not. I'm glad that we've got somebody who knows how to manage, but if he's brought those boardroom ideas into government, you know, boardrooms are closed rooms. Companies are totalitarian, they close doors, they keep secrets. If he's brought that aspect of management with him into government, then he's in trouble and we're in trouble, and Webster was right from the beginning.
As it will be proven that Webster was right from the beginning. Self-important, pompous, inflated, haggis bagpipe, oatmeal savage, though he thinks I am the twit. There are only a few calls for you, and I'm not the least bit surprised. After the break, more calls if you can be bothered to dial. Give him a beat, Mike. Okay, number of quick, sharp calls to Charlie Lynch. The book is Race for the Rose. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Lynch, someday when you write out one of your columns, could you dedicate it to writing any specific differences between Trudeau and Mulroney? And I trust you won't leave us a blank column for lack of source material.
Oh, I can tell you right now, Trudeau is a socialist, Mulroney's a conservative. Philosophically, they're apart, but they're together on the language question and on the Constitution and on Quebec's place in Confederation.
Who's the smarter guy?
Mr. Lynch, with respect to the cancellation of the federal funding for the natural gas pipeline to Nanaimo, and the jobs
No, I'm not getting into that. I'll explain that to you later. But he's a bore, that fellow. He phones too regularly. Oh, we have enough bores on the program without adding to
You
them.
wanted to know who was the smarter
Yeah,
between
who's the
Trudeau
smarter?
and Mulroney? Trudeau, intellectually. Mulroney in a common sense, horse sense way.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I would like to make 2 points. The first one is that I think the reason for the win of the Conservatives in Quebec was because the Liberals never supported John Chrétien, the elected Liberals, and that's why people voted for Conservative. But the other point I want to make was that I've just heard a report a couple of weeks ago, an American newspaper reporter covering the Canadian election said that the Canadian press did a bad job of not getting through. I mean, they had access to the leaders, but they didn't make the leaders' policies come more out to the people. And I think
That's right, ma'am. That's right, ma'am. You're dead right. Charlie doesn't agree with you.
Well, neither did the American press in the U.S. election. The U.S. election was a bummer. It was a really dull election. Ours was exciting. I don't think they got any closer to Reagan than we did to Mulroney. So I don't know that we were We do a bad job, I agree. I'm very critical of our own skills and the job we do. That's one reason why people say our politics are boring when they're really not. It's partly our fault, not Webster's fault, my fault.
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead from Castlegar. Castlegar.
Charlie Lynch.
Yeah,
This is another old relic from out east.
good stuff.
75 years in Ontario, down in and
Have you got your television up?
country.
Are you there? I can't hear you.
Can't you?
No. What's the point you want to make, old relic?
Sure you don't want to hear me.
We want to hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, are you sure you don't want to hear me?
We do want to hear you, yes.
I've followed your career, and I've followed all the prime ministers and the government in the East.
No, my dear, I'd like to continue with the call, but the program will soon be over. Just say one word to describe Charlie Lynch in your mind. What do you think he's a fink? What do you think of Charlie?
She's obviously crazy about me. She's speechless.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Mr. Lynch.
Yeah.
In your book, you can't print that. You wrote that Roosevelt was born in Canada, whereas the Encyclopedia Britannica says he was born in Hyde Park, New York. Now, in the interest of history, who's right?
No, I think I've misread it. The Franklin D. Roosevelt Jr., the son of Franklin Roosevelt, the president, was born in Grand Manan, and so Franklin D. Roosevelt Jr. could not run for president. FDR himself, of course, as you say, was born in Hyde Park.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to ask Mr. Lynch about his reference to people on UI. The fact that most people on UI don't want to work, I don't believe this is true. People want to work, and we have a right to work.
I didn't say that. I said this. They want to cut out the number of people that they think are on UI who would rather be there than work. I didn't say, I wasn't expressing my opinion, I was expressing the opinion of the government.
That's right, and to add to it, the people who would rather be on UI than work for $3.50 an hour, which is less than UI in many cases.
That's correct, yeah.
Charles, don't miss the portly Lynch, complete with beard, autographing his new book, Race for the Rose, at Park Royal Shopping Centre, W.H. Smith Books, 12:30 to 1:30 today. Give my love to Claudie.
I shall.
Tell her I hope she becomes Prime Minister. And when are you 65?
On the 3rd of December, Jack, and they're making me retire, but I'm going to carry on.
Good for you, Charlie, and I'll be back after the break. Tomorrow we're going to live it up with Jack McGaw, Sandra Gwynn, an ICBC story to curl your hair, at 9 a.m. precisely. BC's new log export policy from no music.
Can't hear it over here if it's running, but now it's all back on the music. Where was it?
I've been doing it for 20 years.
I couldn't hear it.
BC, sorry, my mistake. BC's new log export policy. Check at midnight. McGaw?
Yeah, well,
Video package with Jack McGaw.
Are the banks driving BC's horse?
That's for Wednesday. Never mind. Live it up with Jack McGaw and Webster at 9 a.m. precisely.